It is Voymonk vlog number 38, and it is 7:45 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, November 27th. And today I wanted to do this vlog about my favorite memories of the 80s. And like a lot of these vlogs, some of them might inspire me to do a video voiceover where I add on and do additional content and talk about some things that really doesn't really quite fit in my vlogs. And this one might be one of those, but I love the 80s. I love the 90s. And I don't think I'm alone. I think there are a lot of people that admire and really love the 80s and 90s. Weird thing is that living in the 80s and 90s, it was the opposite. You actually had a lot of people that loved the 60s and 70s and talked a lot more about that. I know it's ironic as we kind of age and move towards different generations, how those things could kind of happen. I mean, the truth of the matter is that in the 80s, I think there was a lot of a lack of appreciation for what I think today a lot more people revere in terms of some of their greatest memories and some of the favorite things during the 80s and 90s. And I think sometimes, as I think it's accurate, that looking back on things, especially if you've never lived them, or even sometimes if you have, to sometimes kind of isolate things as being better or worse than they actually ever were. And I think that's just a human condition thing. That's not a real critique thing. But in terms of my memories, specifically the thing that I loved about the 80s, which there were a lot of things not to love about the 80s. And I definitely won't be getting into that specifically, especially here. But the 80s were a time that I think looking back, and it was a great degree of naivety, a lot of ignorance, a lot of complete unawareness of the world around us. And at the same time, there was still kind of ways that we were keyed into the way things were in terms of we were certainly under the threat of nuclear war that could have happened at any time when the Soviet Union was still around. I definitely remember the talks with Reagan and Gorbachev and a lot of the diplomatic things that were done in terms of that in order to negotiate a more peaceful relationship between our countries. And I remember that being something that's really, at the time, because of so much fear about what hostilities could eventually lead to, I think one of the greater memories that I had was, for example, the Berlin Wall coming down and the separation from Eastern and Western Germany pretty much kind of coming to an end, the division. I also really love the fact that we had a lot of, I want to say, my favorite kind of music growing up, which was more kind of techno, Eurodance was just emerging. And of course, I'll call it electronica or synthwave music, which is some of my favorite. I thought the 80s was a great time, mostly for a lot of sci-fi as well. Star Trek: The Next Generation was coming back, which if you've listened to what I said about when Star Trek first came along, it wasn't it there was a lot of expectations that were met, and there were a lot that were not. I also like the fact that there was a lot of other interesting series like Alienation, which was a Fox venture when it first came out as a competition for the big three, ABC, NBC, and CBS here in the United States. And they came along pretty aggressively. That's something I definitely remember and loved about the 80s, is the fact that we were just starting to eventually emerge more and newer content. And I mean that not just in the big three channels, which Fox eventually competed with, but you also had independent stations that were more local, like UHF stations. For anybody out there that remembers their rabbit ears and they're fiddling with the back of the antenna to make sure that they can barely get the reception in of some of the UHF stations and television. And while I mean, it certainly wasn't as clear or as crisp or as impressive as probably TV is now. There was something very quaint and very comfortable in a lot of ways, and very nostalgic in the fact that being so desperate for some kind of stimulation besides other people watching a TV show or having something on to kind of occupy your mind. That was something that was great about the 80s. And me having ADHD, maybe that's part of the reason why. I don't know. But I was definitely an introvert. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was, had a lot of things that made it to where, most of my time had to be filled with either my imagination or with finding something to be interested in. And that's why probably TV was a huge outlet for me. And like I said, as far as music is concerned, I definitely remembered, because there was limited content, like not the streaming services and we didn't even have the 40, 50 channels, which considered a luxury back then. A lot of the things that you would watch, the big deal, were on the commercial, over the airwaves, censored FCC TV channels. And really, I don't know that it was necessarily better. I just know that they were some of the better and greater memories during that time. And I think it also had to do with the attitudes that went along with it that made the 80s really spectacular and really special to me. And going into the 90s, which I might do a different vlog about. But I definitely think I'm going to be making a video voiceover a little bit more about the 80s. Like I said, a video voiceover, that kind of thing. But until then, that is what is on my mind for this vlog. Until next time, take care.